In the freezing winter cold, where even breath turns into white mist, the road seemed completely lifeless. Then, through the cutting wind, a faint sound broke the silence. A cry, swallowed by snow and forest. The dog suddenly stopped, claws gripping the frozen road, ears standing straight, eyes locked on an unseen space ahead, as if it heard something no human could. The Navy SEAL slowed down, not out of curiosity, but because he had learned to trust moments like this. An old woman trembling, a frightened child, a scene that made even war feel distant. This is not a story about strength, but about compassion in the face of brutal cold. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe in quiet miracles, please like and subscribe to the channel. The road cut through the northern forest like a pale scar, narrow and quiet, bordered by tall pines that stood motionless beneath a winter sky. It was late winter in northern Minnesota, the kind of cold that no longer screamed but lingered, sharp, clean, and patient. Sunlight reflected off the frozen lake to the east, turning the ice into a wide sheet of white glass. The air was bright, almost deceptively calm. Aiden Cross drove with both hands steady on the wheel. At 35, his face was clean-shaven, sharp in its lines, shaped by discipline rather than age. His jaw was squared, his cheekbones defined, his expression unreadable but alert. His hair was cut short in the old military style, no fade, no vanity, just practical, grown out enough to remind anyone who looked closely that he no longer served, even if the habit still did. He wore a worn olive tactical combat shirt, the fabric softened by years of use, faded slightly at the seams. His old military pants were scuffed at the knees, the pockets sagging faintly from constant use. Heavy work boots rested against the pedals, their leather scratched and dulled by snow, mud, and time. A battered military watch sat on his wrist, the glass nicked and cloudy, still keeping perfect time. Aiden rarely looked at the watch anymore. He had learned that time behaved differently after certain kinds of missions. In the passenger seat sat Coda. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, large and solid, his sable coat thick against the cold. His fur shifted from deep black along the spine to warm brown at the flanks, catching the winter light. His amber eyes were awake in a way that never fully rested, scanning, absorbing. His ears stood upright, angled slightly forward, attuned to sounds beyond human notice. Coda had served with Aiden during his final years in uniform, not as a weapon, not as a tool, but as a presence. He had learned to read the dog the way others read weather. That was why Aiden noticed immediately when Coda went still. Not tense, not aggressive, still. The dog's body locked in place, one paw lifted just off the seat. His head turned sharply toward the tree line, muzzle low, nostrils flaring. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl meant to threaten, but something deeper. A warning meant for one person only. Aiden eased off the gas. The truck slowed, tires crunching softly over packed snow. He didn't speak. He didn't ask what was wrong. Years ago, he might have questioned it, might have waited for clearer evidence. But those years had taught him something simple and costly. When Coda stopped, it meant something was already too close to ignore. Aiden pulled to the shoulder and cut the engine. The silence pressed in immediately. The forest held its breath. Coda jumped down from the truck without command, snow crunching under his weight. He moved with deliberate slowness toward the trees, pausing every few steps, ears flicking, nose working the air. Aiden followed. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't need one. He moved the way men did who had learned that rushing was how you missed things. The hunting shack appeared between the pines like a forgotten thought. It was old, half collapsed, its wooden walls gray with age. Snow had piled against the sides, nearly burying the lower boards. The door hung crooked on its hinges, barely closed. No smoke. No tracks that were obvious at first glance. Then Aiden saw movement inside. A woman sat on the dirt floor, her back pressed against the far wall. She was small, thin, wrapped in a long brown wool coat that had once been well cared for, and now showed the strain of years. Her hair was silver, pulled into a low, uneven braid that rested over one shoulder. Her face was lined deeply, but her eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone who had given up. In her arms was a child. The boy couldn't have been more than 6. He was bundled in a navy blue winter coat that hung loose on his small frame, the sleeves swallowing his hands. His cheeks were red with cold, his lips pale. He clung to the woman with both arms, his face buried against her chest, breathing shallowly. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them cried out. The woman's body shifted subtly, angling to shield the child as soon as she saw Aiden. Her eyes locked onto his face, measuring, calculating. Fear was there, but controlled, the kind that came from experience. Aiden stopped several feet from the door. He raised his hands slowly, palms open. "It's okay," he said, his voice low, even. "I'm not here to hurt you." The woman didn't answer. Her arms tightened around the boy. Behind Aiden, Coda moved forward. Then, without warning, the dog lay down directly in front of the doorway, his broad back facing the woman and the child, his head turned outward toward the forest. His posture was unmistakable, calm, grounded, guarding. The boy shifted. One small hand slipped free from the woman's coat and reached out, trembling, until his fingers brushed against Coda's thick fur. The child's breathing changed almost immediately, slower, deeper. Aiden felt something tighten in his chest. He crouched slightly, lowering himself without advancing. He reached into his jacket and removed a thermos, unscrewing the lid carefully. Steam curled into the cold air. "I'm going to set this here," he said. "You don't have to take it." He placed the thermos on the snow just outside the shack, then stepped back. The woman watched every movement. Finally, she spoke. "We're fine," she said. Her voice was thin but steady. "We don't need help." Aiden nodded once. "I believe you," he said, "but it's cold and the road isn't safe to walk today." The woman hesitated. The boy's fingers curled tighter in Coda's fur. "My name is Aiden," he added quietly. "That's my dog. His name's Coda." Coda didn't move. Minutes passed. Then, very slowly, the woman shifted her weight and reached for the thermos. She took a sip, then pressed the lid to the boy's lips. The child drank greedily, then sagged slightly, exhausted. "My name is Mabel," she said at last. "This is my grandson, Noah." Her eyes never left Aiden. "I won't force you," he said, "but my truck's warm." Mabel closed her eyes for a brief moment. That was when Coda lifted his head. His ears pricked sharply. His body tensed, not aggressive, but alert. He turned his muzzle toward the far end of the clearing and released a single, sharp exhale through his nose. Aiden felt it then. That subtle shift in the air. The sense of being observed. He glanced toward the trees and saw nothing, but the feeling stayed. Coda rose and moved several steps into the snow, nose low, tracking something invisible. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and pawed once at the ground. Aiden followed and crouched. There, half covered by fresh snow, were faint tire impressions. Not old, not weathered, recent. And beneath the clean winter air, a trace of something sharp and mechanical. Oil. Aiden straightened slowly. When he turned back, Mabel was watching him with a different expression now. Not fear, but realization. Someone else had been here. Aiden made his decision. He helped Mabel to her feet and lifted Noah with careful ease. The boy didn't resist. He leaned instinctively toward Coda, who walked close, pressing his flank lightly against the child's legs. They reached the truck without speaking. As Aiden opened the passenger door and turned on the heater, his eyes drifted back toward the tree line. The forest looked unchanged, silent, but he knew better. Somewhere out there, someone had already passed through this place and hadn't meant to be seen. The road narrowed as Aiden turned off the main stretch and followed the familiar curve toward the lake. Snow fell lightly now, the kind that didn't sting, but erased details all the same. Pines closed in on both sides, their tall trunks dark against the white ground. The forest here felt different than the road they'd left behind. Less exposed, more watchful. Sound softened. Even the engine seemed to lower its voice. In the back seat, Noah slept curled against the door, his small body wrapped in one of Aiden's spare blankets. His breath rose and fell unevenly, the exhaustion of fear and cold pulling him under in heavy waves. Mabel sat beside him, one arm braced protectively around the boy, her posture rigid despite the warmth returning to her hands. She hadn't said a word since they left the clearing. Aiden didn't push. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift, boots steady on the pedals. The old military watch on his wrist ticked quietly, marking time he no longer measured by objectives or extraction windows. Only distance, only arrival. Coda sat in the passenger seat, upright and alert, amber eyes tracking the forest beyond the windshield. Snow clung to the edges of his thick sable fur. His ears shifted constantly, catching sounds Aiden knew he would never hear. They reached the lake just as the sky began to dim toward evening. Aiden's cabin stood a short distance from the frozen shoreline, partially hidden among the trees. It wasn't large. It wasn't pretty. The roof sloped unevenly where time and weather had pressed down. The cedar boards had gone gray, warped in places, reinforced in others. It was a place built to endure, not impress. Mabel studied it through the windshield. "This is yours?" she asked at last. Aiden nodded once. "Was my parents'. I keep it up." He parked, cut the engine, and stepped out into the cold. Coda jumped down beside him immediately, snow crunching under his paws. The dog paused, nose lifting, taking in the unfamiliar scents. Mabel hesitated before opening her door. Up close, she looked smaller than she had in the shack. 72 years had thinned her frame, stooped her shoulders slightly, but her face still carried sharp definition. Her skin was pale and weathered, eyes a clear gray that missed little. Her silver hair had slipped loose from its braid, strands clinging to her temples. She moved carefully, as though conserving energy. Aiden lifted Noah gently, adjusting the blanket as the boy shifted but didn't wake. Coda pressed close, his body forming a quiet barrier as they crossed the clearing. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and cold iron. There was no electricity, only a small lantern Aiden set on the table, its soft glow revealing a single-room space with a stone hearth, a narrow couch pushed against one wall, and a sturdy table scarred by years of use. The kitchen area at the back held a sink, a counter, and shelves built by hands that had valued function over symmetry. Mabel stood just inside the doorway, eyes moving quickly, taking inventory. "This isn't temporary," she said. Aiden glanced at her. "No." He laid Noah on the couch, propping his head with a folded jacket. The boy murmured softly, but didn't wake. Coda lay down immediately at his feet, head up, body angled toward the door. Mabel watched the dog with a mix of caution and curiosity. "He doesn't leave him," she noted. "No," Aiden agreed. "He won't." He moved to the hearth and began setting a fire, hands steady, movements economical. When the flames caught, warmth spread slowly, pushing back the cold with patience rather than force. Mabel sank into a chair near the table. Hands wrapped around the mug Aiden offered her. Steam rose between them. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. Aiden shrugged out of his jacket, revealing the worn tactical combat shirt beneath. The fabric was faded, softened by time, creased at the shoulders where weight had once been carried. "I know," he said. Silence settled. Not awkward, but heavy with things neither of them were ready to say. Mabel's eyes drifted to Noah, then to Coda. "He trusts the dog," she said. "So do I." That earned a faint, humorless smile. Night fell quickly. The wind moved through the trees outside, combing branches, pressing against the cabin walls. The lake answered with low, distant cracks beneath the ice, the sound traveling like something alive. Aiden laid out a second blanket for Mabel and gestured toward the chair. "You can rest," he said. She shook her head. "I'll sit." She remained upright, hands folded in her lap, eyes flicking occasionally toward the door, toward the windows. Aiden recognized the posture. He didn't comment. Coda did not settle into sleep. Instead, the dog positioned himself between Noah and the center of the room, back straight, ears high, gaze fixed toward the darker corner near the rear wall. Aiden noticed, but said nothing. Hours passed. The fire burned low, then lower. Shadows stretched thin across the walls. Aiden woke sometime after midnight with the sense that the room had changed. Not louder, not brighter, focused. Coda stood near the back of the cabin now, his body tense but controlled. One paw hovered just off the floor. His eyes were fixed on the far wall, near the shelves. Aiden sat up slowly, breath steady. "What is it?" he whispered. Coda didn't turn. The dog lowered his head and released a quiet, restrained sound from deep in his chest. Not a growl. A signal. Aiden rose and moved closer, boots silent on the floor. He followed Coda's line of sight. There, beneath the shelf, was a narrow section of wall where the boards didn't quite align. The draft there was colder, sharper. Aiden pressed his palm against the wood. Cold seeped into his skin faster than expected. He stepped back. "All right," he murmured. "I see it." Coda eased slightly, but remained in place, sitting squarely between the wall and the room. From the chair, Mabel spoke. "He always stood there," she said. Aiden turned. Her eyes were fixed on the wall, not on him. "My son," she continued, "when we stayed places like this, he'd stand between us and whatever didn't feel right." The words landed heavier than she seemed to intend. Aiden nodded once, absorbing it. He didn't ask more. Morning came pale and slow. Sunlight filtered through the trees, catching the frozen lake in a soft glow. The cabin looked different in daylight. Less ominous, more honest. Its flaws were clearer now. Its strengths, too. Noah woke hungry. He ate quietly, sitting on the couch with Coda pressed against his side. Mabel watched him with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to take calm for granted. Outside, Aiden stepped onto the porch, the cold biting at his face. He scanned the tree line, the road, the snow-covered ground. Nothing obvious. Still, the sense from the night before lingered. This place wasn't empty, not in the way people assumed. Aiden went back inside, pulling on his jacket. "I'll need to make a call," he said. Mabel looked up. "To who?" "Someone local," he replied, "just to let them know you're here." She studied his face, weighing something. "All right," she said finally, "but we don't leave." Aiden nodded. "Not today." Coda's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the forest stood quiet, patient, as though waiting to see what choice would come next. The knock came just after noon. Not loud, not rushed. 3 even taps against the cabin door, spaced carefully, as if whoever stood outside understood the value of patience. Aiden was at the table, cleaning a mug that was already clean. He stopped mid-motion. Across the room, Coda's head lifted, ears angling forward. The dog rose smoothly to his feet and moved to stand between the couch and the door, his body forming a quiet line of defense. Noah reacted instantly. He slid closer to Mabel, small fingers gripping the fabric of her sleeve. His shoulders hunched, chin tucking down the way children did when they wanted to disappear without running. Mabel didn't move. She had been waiting for this sound. Aiden met her eyes briefly. She gave the smallest nod permission, not surrender. "I've got it," Aiden said. He crossed the room and opened the door. Cold air spilled inside, sharp and clean. 2 figures stood on the porch. The first was a woman in her early 30s, average height, with straight brown hair pulled back into a low ponytail beneath a knit cap. Her winter uniform was practical rather than imposing dark jacket with a county badge stitched near the shoulder. Boots dusted with snow, gloves tucked into her belt. Her face was calm, observant, with eyes that had learned to listen before judging. Deputy Claire Winslow. She carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that didn't rely on volume. Years working in small towns had taught her that force rarely solved the things that mattered most. Beside her stood a man who did not belong to the cold. Harlan Voss was tall, but narrow, his posture upright, almost polished. He wore a charcoal wool coat that looked too clean for the setting, buttoned neatly despite the temperature. A dark scarf was wrapped with casual precision around his neck. His hair was light brown, combed back smoothly, untouched by wind. His face was clean-shaven, his features sharp but pleasant high cheekbones, straight nose, a mouth that curved easily into reassurance. His eyes were brown and steady. They assessed Aiden with open interest, then drifted past him toward the interior of the cabin. "Mr. Cross," Claire said, her voice measured. "Thank you for calling." Aiden stepped aside enough to let her see in. "Glad you came." Harlan smiled faintly. "I appreciate you opening the door," he said. His voice was warm, even, practiced in rooms where trust needed to be built quickly. "This doesn't have to be uncomfortable." Coda took one step forward. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present. Harlan's eyes flicked down to the dog, then back up. The smile didn't fade, but something tightened briefly at the corners of his mouth. Claire noticed. "Let's step inside," she said, "out of the cold." Inside, the cabin felt smaller. Claire removed her gloves, scanning the room with professional efficiency. Her gaze lingered briefly on Noah, then on Mabel. She softened slightly when she saw the boy pressed against his grandmother, eyes wide, body rigid. Harlan closed the door behind them with care. "Mabel," he said gently. "There you are." Mabel's hands clenched in her lap. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were sharp, fixed on Harlan's. "You followed us," she said. Harlan sighed, not irritated, but disappointed. "I've been worried. You left without saying where you were going." "You didn't need to know," she replied. Claire stepped in smoothly. "Mr. Voss, why don't you explain your relationship to the child?" Harlan nodded. "Of course." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew a slim folder, holding it loosely, not thrusting it forward. "My name is Harlan Voss," he said. "I was a close friend of Noah's mother. After her passing, I helped manage the paperwork, appointments, benefits, stability." His eyes shifted briefly toward the couch. "No child should be uprooted like this," he continued. "It's confusing, traumatizing." Noah flinched at the word. Coda shifted his weight subtly, placing himself more fully between the boy and the man. Harlan noticed this time. "I understand the concern," he said, tone unchanged. "But I have documentation." Claire held out her hand. "May I see it?" Harlan passed her the folder. Claire opened it and began reading, her expression neutral. Aiden watched Harlan. The man stood comfortably in the center of the room, hands relaxed at his sides, posture open. He did not crowd. He did not raise his voice. Everything about him suggested reason. That was what unsettled Aiden most. People who wanted control rarely needed to shout. "Noah," Claire said gently, lowering herself slightly to the boy's level. "Can you tell me if you know this man?" Noah shook his head quickly, pressing closer to Mabel. Harlan smiled. "He's shy, always has been." Mabel's voice cut through the room. "You told me to keep him quiet." The air shifted. Harlan turned to her slowly. "Mabel, you said questions made things harder," she continued, her voice steady but brittle. "You said I should be grateful." Claire looked up from the papers. "These documents," she said, "are pending verification." Harlan's smile didn't falter. "That's a technicality." "It's the law," Claire replied calmly. "They don't grant custody." Harlan exhaled, as if disappointed by bureaucracy rather than consequence. "Then I'll wait." He glanced at Aiden. "This is generous of you, truly. But Temporary solutions rarely help children long term. Coda's ears flattened slightly. The dog did not growl. He simply stared. Harlan took one small step forward, no closer to Noah, just closer to the center of the room. Coda moved instantly. He stepped into the space between Harlan and the couch, body squared, eyes locked, chest rising with a slow, controlled breath. No sound, no threat, just a boundary. Harlan stopped. For the first time, his eyes hardened, not with anger, but calculation. "Is he trained?" he asked Aiden quietly. "Yes," Aiden replied, "and he listens." The meaning landed. Claire closed the folder. "Mr. Voss, until these documents are verified, Noah stays where he is." Harlan straightened, smoothing his coat. "Of course." He turned to Mabel, his expression gentle again. "We'll talk soon." Mabel didn't respond. Outside, Harlan paused at the edge of the porch and looked back once more. His gaze lingered on Noah, then on Coda, then on Aiden. "Children belong where they're safe," he said. Then he smiled and left. Coda followed him to the door, watching through the window until the car disappeared down the narrow road. The cabin felt quieter after. Claire remained, slipping her gloves back on. "I'll run the paperwork," she said, "but I want you to be careful." Aiden nodded. Mabel sagged slightly in her chair, exhaustion finally catching up. Noah leaned into Coda, fingers twisting into the dog's fur. Outside, the forest stood still. And somewhere beyond the trees, a man with a trustworthy voice was already planning his next move. The sky was pale and brittle when they returned to the forest. Morning light filtered through the pines in thin bands, turning the snow into a sheet of quiet glare. The air was colder than the day before, sharper, as if the night had stripped away whatever softness remained. Aiden drove with the window cracked just enough to let the cold in. It helped him think. Claire sat in the passenger seat, her posture relaxed but alert. In daylight, she looked younger than she had the day before. Early 30s, lean build, shoulders square beneath her winter jacket. Her brown hair was pulled into a low ponytail, practical and unadorned. The lines at the corners of her eyes spoke less of age than of habit, listening carefully, weighing words before reacting. In the back seat, Mabel stared out the window, her thin hands folded in her lap. She wore the same long brown coat, the wool brushed smooth at the elbows from years of use. Her face was drawn, but composed, eyes scanning the trees as if reading them the way others read streets. She had not objected when Claire suggested returning to the shack. She had only nodded once. Noah stayed at the cabin with a neighbor Claire had called in, someone local, reliable. Coda remained with them, standing in the bed of the truck, front paws braced against the cab, ears cutting the air like antennae. They parked where the road narrowed and continued on foot. The hunting shack came into view between the trees, just as it had before. In daylight, it looked smaller, more fragile. Its walls bowed slightly inward, roof sagging under the weight of years. Snow lay undisturbed across the clearing at first glance, pristine and unbroken. Aiden knew better than to trust first impressions. He moved slowly, scanning the ground, the tree line, the edges where snow met bark. He did not touch anything. He did not lead. He simply observed, letting the picture assemble itself. "There," Claire said quietly. She pointed with two fingers toward the far side of the clearing. Tire tracks. They were faint, partially filled in by drifting snow, but unmistakable, narrow, shallow grooves cut into the surface, angled slightly toward the shack before curving away. Not a full-size truck. Something lighter. A small utility vehicle, maybe. Aiden crouched beside the tracks without stepping into them. He studied the depth, the spacing. Recent, he said, within a day, maybe less. Mabel inhaled sharply behind him. They moved closer to the shack. Near the door, half buried under a crust of ice, lay a shard of red plastic. Claire knelt and lifted it carefully with a gloved hand. "Tail light," she said. "Passenger side." She slipped it into an evidence bag. Aiden's gaze followed a shallow groove in the snow that ran from the shack toward the tree line, a drag mark. Something heavy had been pulled or carried with effort. "Someone waited," Mabel said suddenly. Both Aiden and Claire looked at her. "He watched us," Mabel continued. "I felt it that night. I thought it was the cold." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Coda lowered his head and began to move, nose close to the ground. He traced the edge of the clearing, then angled toward the trees, following an invisible line. His body language changed. Not excited, not frantic, focused. Aiden followed at a distance, careful not to interfere. Coda stopped near a low branch where a dark thread clung to the bark. He sniffed it once, then looked back at Aiden. Aiden crouched and examined it. Fabric, wool, dark gray. He straightened slowly and met Claire's eyes. "Harlan's coat," he said. Claire exhaled through her nose. "That's enough for me." They finished documenting the site quickly. No rushing, no assumptions. When they turned back toward the truck, Aiden felt the familiar tightening behind his ribs, the sense that something had already shifted. The drive back was quiet. Snow thickened as they neared the cabin. When it came into view, Aiden's foot eased off the gas without conscious thought. The front door was closed. That wasn't what stopped him. It was the way Coda reacted. The dog's ears snapped forward, his body stiffening in the truck bed. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not loud enough to be a growl, but too deliberate to be dismissed. Aiden killed the engine. They approached together. The door frame bore faint scratches near the latch. Not enough to splinter the wood, enough to suggest someone had tried to be careful and failed. Inside, the cabin felt wrong. Nothing was overturned. No drawers pulled out. No signs of panic. But the air had been disturbed. An indefinable sense that something had been touched. Aiden moved through the room slowly. The table was clear, the couch undisturbed, the shelves intact. He stopped at the back wall. The narrow gap beneath the shelf, the place Coda had guarded the night before, was exposed. The board that had once sat flush was slightly shifted. Aiden knelt and pressed his fingers into the seam. It moved. "Claire," he said. She joined him, eyes narrowing. Behind them, Mabel covered her mouth. "They were looking for it," she whispered. "For what?" Claire asked. Mabel swallowed. "A box." Aiden eased the board free. Behind it was a shallow recess, barely large enough to hide anything more than a small container. It was empty now. Dust had been disturbed, leaving faint streaks where something had been removed. Mabel's knees buckled slightly. She sank into the nearest chair. "My son hid it there," she said, "years ago. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should never let anyone have it." Aidan sat back on his heels, the past pressing close. For a moment, the room blurred not from panic, but from memory. He was back on a different ground, under a different sky. Dust instead of snow, heat instead of cold. A man had spoken up during briefing, quiet but certain. Something felt off, a pattern that didn't fit. The team had moved anyway. Orders were orders. The explosion came exactly where instinct had warned them it would. They lost 2 that day. Aidan had learned the cost of ignoring small signals. The memory receded. He rose slowly. This wasn't random, he said. They didn't take anything else. Claire nodded. They knew what they were looking for. Coda moved to the door, scanning the tree line, body angled outward. He did not bark. He did not chase. He stood guard. As Aidan replaced the board, his fingers brushed against something wedged deeper inside the wall. Something that hadn't been taken. Paper. He drew it out carefully. A folded scrap, yellowed at the edges, handwritten. A name. And beneath it, a date. Mabel stared at it, eyes wide. That wasn't there before. Aidan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Whatever had been hidden here wasn't just valuable. It was unfinished. The storm worsened by late afternoon. Snow fell harder now, swallowing the tracks they had followed earlier. By the time Claire finished making her calls, the forest looked untouched again. She closed her phone and turned to Aidan. "I'm filing for an emergency protective order," she said. "Effective immediately. He won't be allowed near Noah or Mabel." Aidan nodded. "Good." Claire hesitated. "This will escalate things." "It already has," he replied. Mabel sat quietly, hands clasped around the scrap of paper. "I thought hiding would keep him safe," she said. "I was wrong." Aidan shook his head. "You kept him alive. That counts." Night fell as they prepared the cabin again. The fire burned stronger this time. The locks were checked. The lanterns set. Coda took his place by the door, eyes open, breathing steady. Outside, the snow erased the footprints one by one. Inside, the danger had finally taken shape. The pressure didn't arrive with threats. It arrived quietly. Aidan noticed it first in the way the road felt different when he drove into town the next morning. Not empty, not busy. Watched. A pickup lingered too long at an intersection. A sedan idled near the hardware store, its engine running though no one got out. The faces turned away a half-second too late. Nothing illegal. Nothing obvious. The kind of attention meant to be felt, not proven. Claire had warned him this would happen. "If he can't take the child," she'd said over the phone, "he'll try to make staying uncomfortable." Aidan parked beside the library and cut the engine. Snow fell in slow, dry flakes, dusting the hood. Coda jumped down from the truck, shook once, and immediately paused. His ears angled back, then forward. His tail stiffened. Aidan followed the dog's gaze. Across the street, a man leaned against a lamppost, pretending to scroll on his phone. He wore a knit cap pulled low and a jacket too thin for the cold. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't look interested. He looked bored. "Come on," Aidan murmured. Inside the library, warmth and quiet wrapped around them. The smell of paper and old carpet lingered in the air. Mabel sat near the back, speaking softly with a woman behind the desk. Evelyn Gallagher was in her late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered. with iron gray hair cut just below her ears. Her face was weathered, skin freckled from years outdoors, but her eyes were kind and sharp. She had worked at the library most of her life, first shelving books, then running children's programs. People trusted her because she remembered their names and their stories. Beside her stood Tom Gallagher, her husband, a quiet man with a heavy build and permanently reddened hands. He smelled faintly of oil and sawdust, the scent of someone who fixed things rather than replaced them. He nodded at Aidan once, slow and deliberate. "I told her," Evelyn was saying to Mabel, "you don't disappear from town unless something's wrong." Mabel's mouth curved faintly. "I didn't want to bring trouble back with me." Evelyn waved that away. "Trouble doesn't need an invitation." Noah sat at a low table nearby, crayons scattered in front of him. He glanced up when Aidan entered, relief flashing across his face. Coda walked straight to the boy and lay down beside his chair. Noah rested one small hand on the dog's back without looking. Aidan felt the tension ease from the room by a fraction. They left together not long after, Evelyn pressing a paper bag of food into Mabel's hands, Tom offering to check the locks at the cabin later that afternoon. No questions. No conditions. Outside, the man by the lamppost was gone. The first sign came less than a mile down the road. Coda shifted in the back seat, then stood, placing his paws against the cab. He let out a short, insistent huff. Aidan pulled over. The underside of Mabel's car was dusted with snow and road salt. Aidan crouched and followed Coda's nose. There, tucked behind the rear bumper, was a small white disc. An AirTag, cheap, common, legal to buy, illegal to use this way. Aidan pried it loose and turned it over in his palm. "He's been tracking us," Mabel whispered. Claire arrived 20 minutes later, lights off, posture calm. She examined the device, then slipped it into an evidence bag. "That confirms intent," she said. "Not violence, surveillance." "What now?" Mabel asked. Claire looked at Aidan. "Now we let him think he's winning." The plan was simple and legal. Claire filed for a temporary surveillance warrant based on stalking behavior and interference with a protected minor. In the meantime, she leaked a controlled piece of misinformation. Nothing false enough to be entrapment, just vague enough to bait. The box, she told a mutual contact, was no longer at the cabin. It was being moved. Aidan hated the waiting. He hated the way the pressure pressed inward, invisible but constant. Nights were the worst. He checked locks twice, then 3 times. Coda slept light, always angled toward Noah. One evening, as snow thickened against the windows, Noah spoke. "Are you going to leave too?" he asked quietly. Aidan looked down at him. The boy's face was thin, eyes too old for 6 years. He held one of Coda's ears between his fingers, rubbing it slowly. "No," Aidan said. The word landed with weight. No qualifiers, no promises, wrapped in conditions, just truth. Noah nodded, as if filing it away for later. That night, the power flickered. Once, twice. The lights dimmed, then steadied. The cabin hummed with sudden quiet. Coda rose instantly and moved to Noah's side, pressing close. His ears flattened, not in fear, but concentration. He stared at the dark window, breathing slow and measured. Aidan felt it then. Not danger exactly, but proximity, someone close enough to matter. The power returned seconds later. Nothing happened, and that was worse. The night stretched long. By morning, tire tracks cut the snow near the tree line, not approaching the cabin, but circling it. Testing. Claire came by before noon. "He took the bait," she said. "Someone's been asking questions where they shouldn't." Evelyn and Tom arrived shortly after, Tom with tools in hand, Evelyn with thermoses and quiet resolve. "We'll take shifts," Evelyn said. "Someone's always awake anyway." Mabel protested weakly. No one listened. That afternoon, snow began again, thick and heavy, erasing yesterday's tracks. The forest closed in, patient and indifferent. Inside, the cabin held. Coda lay at Noah's feet. Aidan stood at the window, watching the white swallow the world. Whatever Harlan wanted, he was learning something important. Some things could be taken, others could not. The town hall had never felt so small. It was a low, rectangular building of pale brick and old windows, the kind that had hosted decades of bake sales, school meetings, and quiet votes that rarely stirred emotion. That evening, every chair was filled. People stood along the walls, coats draped over their arms, boots tracking melting snow across the tiled floor. Outside, dusk settled early, pressing cold against the glass. Inside, the town was divided. Aidan stood near the back, arms relaxed at his sides, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. He wore the same worn tactical combat shirt and old military pants, his work boots planted firmly on the floor. Clean-shaven, jaw set, he did not scan the room the way he would have once. He listened instead. Coda lay at his feet, head up, amber eyes moving slowly from face to face. The German shepherd's sable coat caught the fluorescent light, highlighting the black along his spine and the warm brown beneath. He was calm, but not at rest. His ears shifted at every raised voice. Mabel sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap. Her long brown coat hung from her thin shoulders, making her appear smaller than she was. Her silver hair had been braided neatly that morning, a habit she returned to when she needed steadiness. She stared ahead, not at the people, but at the worn wooden podium. Noah sat beside her, legs swinging slightly above the floor, fingers laced tightly together. He leaned just enough toward Coda to feel the dog's presence without touching him. His eyes were wide, taking in the room with quiet vigilance. At the front, Deputy Claire Winslow stood beside the podium, uniform jacket zipped to her throat. Under the harsh lights, the lines of fatigue around her eyes were visible. She had not slept much. Still, her posture was straight, her voice steady, as she called the meeting to order. "We're here to address concerns raised by multiple residents," she said. "This is not a trial. It's a forum." A murmur rippled through the room. From the second row, a man rose to his feet. His name was Douglas Pritchard, mid-40s. Stocky build, ruddy complexion, thinning blonde hair combed carefully over a widening scalp. He owned a small insurance office on Main Street. People knew him as reasonable, practical. "I don't doubt anyone's intentions," Douglas said, hands raised placatingly. "But Mr. Voss has paperwork. That matters. We can't just ignore the law because something feels off." A few heads nodded. Across the aisle, a woman stood abruptly. Renee Alvarez was in her early 30s, tall and lean, dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She worked nights at the hospital and had shadows under her eyes that came from more than lack of sleep. Her voice carried sharp clarity. Paperwork doesn't stop kids from being scared, she said. I've seen what quiet fear looks like. That boy has it. Noah shrank slightly at the attention. Coda shifted closer. Claire raised a hand. Please. The discussion surged anyway. Some spoke of process, of caution, of not accusing a man without proof. Others spoke of Mabel's eyes, of Noah's silence, of how fear didn't always leave bruises. Through it all, Aiden remained still. He wasn't from here. Not really. He knew how easily an outsider could tip the balance the wrong way. This wasn't his fight to lead. It was theirs. Claire waited until the room settled. We have been investigating, she said, discreetly. She placed a folder on the podium. Evidence of surveillance, an illegal tracking device, signs of forced entry, statements indicating psychological coercion. The room quieted. From the side door, a man slipped in late and took a seat near the wall. Harlan Voss. He looked exactly as he always did. Charcoal coat, immaculate. Scarf draped with casual elegance. He stood out not because he was loud, but because he was untouched by the cold. His face held the same pleasant neutrality, eyes attentive, lips curved faintly. When he spoke, he did not raise his hand. I appreciate due diligence, he said smoothly, but allegations can be persuasive. Several people turned. Harlan met their gaze calmly. I've done nothing but try to provide stability, he continued. Children need structure, continuity, not... He gestured vaguely. Fear-driven decisions. Noah flinched. The movement was small, almost invisible. Coda noticed. The dog rose slowly to his feet, stepping forward just enough to place his body between Noah and the open room. His posture was not aggressive. It was protective, final. Aiden felt the shift ripple outward. Noah's voice broke the silence. He gets loud, the boy said. The words were barely above a whisper. Heads turned. Noah swallowed, his hands twisting together. When I ask questions, he yells. The room held its breath. Harlan smiled gently. Children misunderstand tone. He slammed doors, Noah continued, eyes fixed on the floor. I hide with Grandma. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Mabel closed her eyes. Claire did not look at Harlan when she spoke. Thank you, Noah. Harlan's jaw tightened, just a fraction. Mabel stood then. She moved slowly to the podium, her back straight despite the tremor in her legs. When she faced the room, she did not plead. She explained. My son worked for a freight company, she said. He found something wrong. He collected proof, names, dates. Her voice wavered but did not break. He hid it in a metal box. Told me if anything happened, I was to keep it safe for Noah. She looked directly at Harlan for the first time. You wanted that box, she said quietly. Not my grandson. Harlan stood. This is conjecture, he said, tone cooling. There's no proof. Claire lifted the folder. There is now. She turned to the room. Based on evidence gathered, an emergency protective order has been approved, effective immediately. A murmur spread, this time different. Harlan's expression did not change, but his eyes darkened. This isn't over, he said. Claire met his gaze. For tonight, it is. Outside, snow began to fall again. Coda sat beside Noah, tail thumping once against the floor. The town did not cheer, but it did not turn away. The first snow of the new storm arrived without urgency. It drifted down in wide, quiet flakes, settling on rooftops and branches as though the forest itself had decided to rest. The town shrank to a softer world, edges blurred, sounds muffled, the kind of morning that asked for patience rather than vigilance. For the first time in weeks, Aidan woke after sunrise. Light spilled across the cabin floor, pale and steady. The fire had burned low during the night, embers breathing softly beneath a thin layer of ash. Coda lay near the door, curled but alert, his amber eyes opening when Aidan shifted. The dog did not rise. He did not need to. The danger had moved elsewhere. Aidan sat up slowly, joints stiff, breath fogging the air. He ran a hand over his face, clean-shaven jaw rough with the promise of stubble by nightfall. The old military watch on his wrist read just past 7. He hadn't checked it in hours. Across the room, Noah slept. Not the shallow, restless sleep of fear, not the start and stop drifting that had marked his night since arriving. This was deep, even rest. His small chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, one arm flung carelessly over the blanket. He had kicked free of it some time before dawn, the way children did when their bodies finally believed they were safe. Mabel sat at the table. She wasn't asleep, but she wasn't tense either. Her shoulders had dropped, spine no longer rigid. A cloth bag rested at her feet, canvas, faded, handles worn smooth by years of carrying. For weeks, she had kept it slung over her shoulder, even while sitting, as if ready to run at any sound. Now, it sat on the floor. She looked up when Aidan moved, offering a faint, tired smile. "He didn't wake once," she said softly. Aidan nodded. That matters. Outside, tires crunched on fresh snow. Deputy Claire Winslow arrived just after 8, her patrol car pulling up without lights or urgency. She stepped inside with the cold clinging to her jacket, cheeks flushed from the wind. She looked exhausted, but there was something lighter in her eyes. "It's official," she said. "Temporary guardianship remains with you, Mabel, supervised by the county, community sponsorship approved." Mabel closed her eyes, not in relief alone, but in release. "And Harlan?" Aidan asked. Claire exhaled. "He's barred from contact. His access revoked pending further investigation." "Pending," Mabel repeated. Claire nodded. "It won't be quick, but it won't be dangerous." She looked around the cabin, at the fire, at Noah sleeping, at Coda's calm presence by the door. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "All of you." Coda's tail thumped once against the floor. They didn't celebrate. There was paperwork to sign, calls to make, arrangements to confirm. The law moved at its own pace, indifferent to how long fear had lived in the body. But safety had returned, and that was enough for now. Later that morning, Evelyn and Tom Gallagher arrived with thermoses and a basket of fresh bread. Evelyn's iron gray hair was dusted with snow, cheeks pink from the cold. Tom carried a sack of firewood over one shoulder, his movements economical, practiced. "We figured you'd need supplies," Evelyn said briskly, as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. They stayed only a short while, enough to be present, not enough to intrude. When they left, the forest settled again. The afternoon passed slowly. Noah woke hungry and smiling, surprised by his own laughter when Coda nudged a wooden block across the floor with his nose. The dog tolerated the attention with quiet dignity, allowing the boy to climb over his broad back, to bury his fingers in thick sable fur. Mabel watched from the table, hands wrapped around a mug she no longer clutched like a lifeline. Aiden stood at the window, not guarding, just observing. At the edge of the clearing, Coda suddenly lifted his head, not sharply, not with alarm. He rose and walked toward the door, tail loose, ears relaxed. He paused, looking back once at Noah. The boy followed. Outside, snow fell thicker now, blanketing the ground in white. Coda stepped forward into it, leaving deep, confident tracks. Noah hesitated only a second before laughing and chasing after him, boots slipping, arms windmilling. Coda ran. Not fast, not far, but with joy. Aiden felt something loosen inside his chest. That night, the power stayed on. The wind howled beyond the trees, but the cabin held. The fire burned steady. Mabel went to bed without packing her bag. Noah fell asleep before the second story ended, fingers still tangled in Coda's fur. Aiden did not sit by the door. He slept. Morning came clear and bright. Winter stretched out beyond the windows, vast and cold, but no longer predatory. It had lost something. Its teeth, perhaps, or its timing. Aiden stood outside later, breath fogging the air, watching Noah and Coda carve circles through the snow. The boys' laughter echoed across the clearing, unguarded, bright. Coda skidded to a stop, snow spraying from beneath his paws, then bowed playfully, inviting another chase. His amber eyes shone with something that had never been trained. Trust. Aiden rested his hands in the pockets of his old military pants, boots sinking into the snow. He thought of all the missions he had survived because of strength, speed, precision, and of this one. This one had been different. He hadn't been the first to notice the danger. He hadn't been the fastest to respond. He had simply listened when a dog stopped in the road. Inside, Mabel stood at the window, watching them both. She pressed one hand to the glass, the other resting at her side, empty. The winter wind moved through the pines, carrying snow, carrying silence. But it did not hunt anymore. Sometimes we think miracles must arrive loudly, with thunder, with clear answers, with everything suddenly resolved. But more often, miracles come quietly. They arrive when someone chooses to stop instead of walking past, when the heart listens before the mind has proof, when a dog senses what words cannot reach, and a person has the courage to trust that moment. Maybe God does not always remove the storm. Maybe He places the right person inside the storm at the exact moment they are needed, so no one has to face it alone. In our daily lives, we pass by many people carrying burdens we cannot see. A tired child, a silent fear, a door that only needs to be knocked on with gentleness. Faith does not exist only in churches or in prayers spoken out loud. Faith lives in choices, in compassion, in staying when leaving would be easier. If this story touched your heart, thank you for staying until the very end. Your time, your attention, and your willingness to listen are what gives stories like this their meaning. Please share this video with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part of the story spoke to you most, or where you are watching from. And if you believe in quiet miracles, in second chances, and in love that does not walk away, subscribe to this channel so we can continue this journey together. Finally, thank you once again for being here. May God watch over you, protect you through every season of life, and remind you that even in the coldest moments, you are never truly alone.